I know you've probably seen content around the Dyatlov Pass incident on YouTube or on the internet, but I implore you, we've found some different stuff. This is a different type of video. I just spit everywhere, and you're gonna like this one. We bring some alternative ideas to this legendary story. And if you are a fan of mysteries, things that you may not understand, then you will enjoy this video, my friends. We talk about many different mysteries on this channel, but one that I have in store for y'all today is maybe the craziest one yet. Certainly the longest. You're gonna have to strap in for this one. I say that every single time. You're gonna have to strap on for this one. All right. Have you ever heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident? If you haven't, then you are in for a treat today, my friend. Speaking of treats, I love candy.
Say the line, Bart.
Go to sarah.gg.
Yeah!
The Dyatlov Pass incident occurred in the late 1950s and involved a group of young adults going on a long winter hike who happened to pass through Dyatlov Pass, where they would all lose their lives. The pass, named after the leader of the group of people we're talking about, and to this day, the causes of their deaths are heavily disputed, and there is not one single theory that everyone can agree on, causing there to be numerous theories as to the real cause of their death. Some very bizarre stuff. These theories stem from the outlandish circumstances in which their bodies were found. Some believe that the cause of death could have been an avalanche, but others believe that it was potentially native people that attacked them, or even the KGB were involved somehow. Maybe even a Yeti. The deaths of the 9 students still perplex people to this day, and that is why this story is so polarizing. Our story begins in January of 1959 in the Sverdlovsk Oblast region in the Soviet Union. A 23-year-old radio engineering student from the Ural Polytechnical Institute named Igor Dyatlov had been dispatched by the local all-union Leninist Young Communist League to go on an expedition through the northern Ural Mountains. Igor decided to bring 9 other students from the college to go with him on the Cat 3 hike. Category 3 meaning it was probably difficult and potentially dangerous, like those black hills with skiing. Who does ever ski? Can't even ski in my own house! Jesus!
You sick, pathetic creep. I hate you.
To be able to even go on a Category 3 hike, you had to be certified by a government official due to its difficulty and level of danger. And also, they love just forcing the government into things that the government shouldn't be in the USSR. And here as well. Eventually, all the students would be approved for the trek, and on January 23rd, 1959, the group would be given their route book. And 2 days later, they would set off from the city of Sverdlovsk and end at Mount Otorten, which I'm definitely saying wrong, and I will continuously say things wrong in this video, and I apologize in advance to all of my Russian friends. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, and their names were Igor Dyatlov, Yuri Doroshenko, Georgy Krevedonishenko, Alexander Kolovatov, Rustem Slobodin, Nikolai Fibo Brignoles, Semyon Zolotoryov, Yuri Yudin, Lyudmila Dubanina, Zinaida Kolomogrova. And this, my friends, is the Dyatlov Pass incident. And from the little bit we've already talked about in regard to this being a giant mystery, I've showed you guys how difficult it can be separating fact from fiction, especially when dealing with mysterious events in today's media's landscapes. The problem has been more relevant than ever, and today we're sponsored by Ground News. News outlets often use sensationalist headlines that distort the truth. Misinformation spreads rapidly on social media, and political biases can skew reporting. How can we navigate this complex informational environment? Well, Ground News! That's where Ground News comes in! Yeah! It is a very powerful tool that I've used every single day for the last year or so. I have the app installed on my iPad, my phone. I have it on my bookmarked on my computer. Whenever I find an article, especially when we're going to cover on a video or something like that, we use Ground News to find all the different sources. It was created by a former NASA engineer, and it helps you cut through the media noise and get to the real story. Once again, I personally use Ground News every single day, and with that, I trust it, and I am genuinely excited to share it with you guys. This is a cool ad. I hope to be able to do more with them in the future, because this is like valuable, genuinely a valuable thing that you guys can use. But why would you download it other than just me using it? Ground News gathers related articles from more than 50,000 sources worldwide, which allows you to compare the different outlets that cover the same story. And there's plenty of examples of this. Let's take a look at a recent example. The US government's statement about UFO sightings. US says UFO sightings likely secret military tests. There's 171 articles, 30 from left-leaning publications, 48 from center-leaning publications, and 30 from right-leaning publications. Obviously, this isn't a very political thing, but it definitely helps you get to the bottom of who exactly is giving you the news that you're turning into things you say on Facebook and stuff. This source, highly factual. In this one, Pentagon releases bombshell report on alien findings, leaving UFO buffs reeling. From the Daily Express, low factuality. So you can kind of see, you know, you can get a better idea of what the fuck's going on out there. Ground News doesn't just show you the articles, it provides context about each source, their political bias, reliability, and ownership, who actually owns the publications, which is incredibly important. And it's all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations, which is fucking awesome. This transparency helps you think critically about the information that you're consuming. And one of my favorite features is the blind spot feed. This shows you stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum. For example, here's a story that is getting significant coverage from left-leaning sources, but minimal attention from the right. And here is another that is the opposite. Helps you break free of potential echo chambers and allows you to become an enlightened centrist like myself. I use Ground News every single day because it helps me cut through nonsense and actually try to learn things in an effective, still fun, but effective way. If you want to give Ground News a try, go to ground.news/Oompaville to sign up. And if you use my link, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all of their features. And I think Ground News is doing very important work, and I hope to work with them again in the future. And I hope you guys support this wonderful sponsor of the channel. Click the link down below, QR code, whatever the hell you need to do, you're going to do it. I love it. I appreciate it. And there we go. Thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video. On the morning of the 25th, the group all arrived by train at Ivdel, a town in the northern half of the Sverdlovsk Oblast region. What the Oblast? I have no idea, but it's here on a map. Then they took a truck to Vizhai, another small town in the northern part of the region, and from there, on the 27th, they would begin their hike to Mount Otorten. Mount Otorten.
Mount Otorten.
Mount Otorten.
Mount Otorten.
I'm trying to think of how a Russian would say Otorten.
Mount Otorten.
Otorten.
Mount Otorten.
As a precaution before the group left, Igor Dyatlov, whom the entire incident and subsequent past is named after, told the Institute members that he would send a telegram to them on February 12th, stating that they had safely made it back to Vizhai, because that is the estimated amount of time that it would take to do that. However, on the 28th of January, shortly after they began their expedition, Yuri Yudin had to drop out due to rheumatism and joint pain, also a congenital heart defect. Poor guy. Before Yuri turned around to trek back to Vizhai, Igor Dyatlov told him that he actually expected to be out a little bit longer than the 12th, and that Yuri needed to tell the Institute members when he got back to Vizhai. Let them know. This will be incredibly important later. This information. Keep it in your brain. Okay? Remember what I just said. What did I just say?
We don't know.
While on the hike, most of the members had their own diaries to write in and their own photography cameras to document the entire trip. They had Polaroids, they was snapping that shit. The diary entries on the 27th seemed to indicate that everyone was excited and in good spirits, as most people are when they first begin a trek in the wilderness. And then it gets terrible, always, it seems like. Not usually this bad, but generally it sucks. All the photos taken by the crew showed them smiling and having a grand old time, and it seemed like the hike was going to plan. That wouldn't last very long, my friends. The weather would only continue to get worse and worse as the days went on, and they climbed higher and higher in elevation. And as seen in their final diary entries, they commented on the weather getting very cold and the terrain getting very difficult to maneuver, and things like firewood becoming more and more scarce. These would be their final diary entries. As mentioned before, Igor was supposed to send a telegram when he reached Vizhai on February 12th. However, the telegram never came. But it didn't really cause much concern as Yuri told everyone back at the incident that Igor expected the trip to take a little longer than planned. And February 20th would come and go, and there was still no contact from the expedition, and this started to cause all the parents and relatives of the hikers to demand a rescue operation to try and find their missing family. Rescue groups would form, mostly volunteer students and teachers at first, and later on the police and army would be involved. And 2 weeks after the expedition was supposed to be back, on February 26th, a group of searchers found the group's damaged tent and described it as half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. Furthermore, it appeared to investigators that the crew cut open the inside of the tent and ran barefoot or with socks on towards a nearby tree line based on the 9 trails of footprints leaving the tent. Eventually, they would begin to find the bodies of the missing group. The first 2 bodies found by searchers were the bodies of Krivonashenko and Doroshenko, and they were found under a large cedar tree on the 27th of February, laying next to each other. Investigators immediately noticed that there was a small fire underneath some of the cedar tree's branches. They also noticed that the branches on the tree were broken up to 5 meters high, and this indicated that someone likely climbed up to the cedar tree in the top of it looking for something and either fell down or broke the branches off as they ascended up or down the tree. One theory suggested that whoever climbed the tree was either looking for the tent or perhaps whatever caused them to leave the tent. Both victims' bodies were incredibly beaten up and even burned. Doroshenko had burns on his foot and right temple, and Krivonashenko had burns on his left leg and left foot. On top of the burns, they had numerous bruises, abrasions, and hemorrhages. And the official cause of death for both members was hypothermia, but there were clearly some injuries that occurred before they died and succumbed to hypothermia. Doroshenko was found with a gray foamy liquid in and around his mouth, and this indicated some kind of traumatic injury or compression to the chest cavity, which could indicate that he was the one to climb up the tree and he fell out of the tree. It is also believed by some that a lot of the cuts and bruises found on his body were from Doroshenko hitting himself with rocks or ice in an attempt to end his state of agony. It's horrible. Krivonashenko was found with his skin in between his teeth, likely indicating that he was biting his hand in an attempt to stay conscious or to keep himself quiet while writhing in agony. The cause of his bruises and cuts are undetermined, but it is possible that he had the same idea as Doroshenko. Their official cause of death was once again hypothermia, but it was clearly aided by the trauma sustained to their bodies, and both of their bodies were missing clothes, which at first was extremely perplexing to investigators and just the average person walking on this. It would later be found out that the other group members came over and cut off or removed the clothes from the 2 bodies after they were already deceased. And this would also explain why they were neatly placed next to each other. The next bodies found were the bodies of Mr. Dyatlov himself, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. Each of their bodies was found in a line and oriented towards the tent, suggesting that they were trying to make their way back to the tent. Dyatlov was found 980 feet from the cedar, Slobodin was found 1,570 feet from the cedar, and Kolmogorova was found 2,070 feet from the cedar. Dyatlov was found the same day as Krivonashenko and Doroshenko, and his clenched fist stuck out above the snow and his jacket was unbuttoned. His clothing was sparse, and it was later confirmed by the only survivor, Yuri, that the jacket Dyatlov was wearing came from Doroshenko, because obviously Yuri, his bones hurt and his heart didn't hurt. What a lucky guy. Holy shit. I can't imagine being the guy who lived, especially all these are your friends, and God, it's gotta be so traumatizing. Anyways, the fact that Dyatlov had Doroshenko's coat demonstrated that Krivonashenko and Doroshenko both had their bodies looted for clothing by the remaining survivors, so something led to that becoming a necessity and reality to them. Dyatlov's hands and face were covered in bruises and cuts, and additionally, he had bruises and hemorrhages on the legs and ankles. He also had no internal injuries, and his official cause of death was deemed as hypothermia. Kolmogorova was found on the 3rd of March, and she was wearing a large amount of clothing, including 2 hats, multiple sweaters, multiple pairs of pants, and no shoes. It was clear that she removed some of the clothes from someone else, potentially Krivonashenko and Doroshenko, as she fled back to the tent. She was not burned, but had numerous bruises and cuts on her hands and head, and one odd thing found on her body was a baton-shaped bruise above her hip, leading some to believe that she or the group was attacked by somebody. Once again, her official cause of death was deemed as hypothermia. Slobodin was found on March 5th, wearing 4 pairs of socks, 2 pairs of pants, multiple long-sleeve shirts and jackets, and had 1 boot on his right foot. His pockets were also filled with miscellaneous items like a comb, matches, and a pocket knife. And just like Dyatlov and Kolmogorova, he had bruises and cuts on his hands, but unlike them, he had major fractures on his frontal bone and hemorrhages in his temporalis muscles. Upon further examination by a professional, a coroner, Slobodin's death became very suspicious. It appeared as though the damage done to his skull could have been done by a blunt force object. Furthermore, it was likely that his head trauma was worsened by him falling to the ground numerous times due to the shock and disorientation caused by the first hit to the head. Additionally, his injury pattern was the opposite of the typical hypothermia case. Typically, in the last moments of life, the palms of the hand and middle of the leg suffer the most damage. However, in the case of Slobodin, he suffered major damage to the outside of his hands and little to no damage to his legs. The official cause of death was hypothermia, but it was believed that Slobodin's head trauma played a major role in him freezing to death and dying of hypothermia due to loss of consciousness. Adding even more suspicion to the deaths of Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin was the fact that livor mortis spots were found on the tops of their bodies. Livor mortis spots are usually on the bottom of bodies because that's where all the blood in your body pools after death due to gravity. However, with these three people, all the livor mortis spots were found in the tops of their corpses, indicating that they were moved sometime after death, after the livor mortis could have formed, which is very odd. Why the f is anybody moving anybody who's dead and you're all like, I don't get it. After the initial bodies were discovered, the search for the remaining 4 hikers continued for 2 months until they were discovered in early May due to the snow beginning to melt. The bodies of Dubinina, Kolevatov, Zolotarov, and Thibaut Brignoles were all found about 50 meters from the original cedar where the first 2 bodies were discovered. So they were closer than all the other bodies that they found, but they couldn't find them because they were buried under the snow. The remaining hikers were discovered because as the snow started to melt, a small trail of cut branches became visible, which led away from the cedar tree. A Mansi native named Kurakov was the first person to discover the trail, and when he followed the trail, it led to an area where there were random pieces of winter clothing spread about. Some of these items of clothing included sweatpants that had one leg cut off, and a woman's sweater that was believed to be Dubinina's that also had the sleeves cut off of it as well. In the area where the clothes were found, there were also small cedar trees with the tops cut off. As soon as the authorities were alerted to this new development, they began to investigate the area, and they began to probe the snow and eventually dug down 11 feet to discover a makeshift den. This den was made with cedar branches and cut pieces of clothing. It is believed that the remaining 4 survivors used the clothing from the other deceased members and their own clothing to layer on top of the cedar branches in order to prevent their skin from directly touching the snow. So not only were they below the snow, they had a mole hole. They had a den down there. What the fuck? Another discovery was made about 15 meters away from the den. A sheath to a knife and spoon were found. This caused investigators to begin probing the snow, and about 5 meters from where the 2 items were found, they hit flesh. And about 13 feet underneath the snow, they found the body of Dubinina. That was on May 5th. So months after everybody went missing. She was slumped over a small ledge with a small river running over it, and eventually they would find the rest of the hikers just downstream from her. Dubinina's body had serious damage done to it internally and on the face. Her face was missing her eyes, her tongue, and her hyoid bone was slightly exposed. That is the bone here, according to the anatomy of your human face. In the autopsy report, the word broken is crossed out and replaced with unusual mobility. Firstly, if the hyoid bone were broken, this would indicate massive trauma to the neck. It also points to strangulation, as it is common for strangulation victims to have their hyoid bones broken. Secondly, Dubinina had numerous broken ribs and a hemorrhaging of the right atrium of the heart, indicating massive trauma to her chest. Her official cause of death would be internal bleeding, meaning that she sustained a massive injury and then died on the ledge, potentially trying to escape from whatever had hit her. The damage done to her ribs was believed to be from a major impact, not from a fall, like something actually hitting her, not her hitting something. Lastly, we mentioned that her tongue was removed from her skull, and it wouldn't be that crazy to believe that an animal could have come and removed the tongue after her death. However, inside her stomach, the coroner found a large dark brown mass, and one might think that this was just old food. However, it was actually a mixture of mucus and blood, indicating that her tongue was removed from her skull while she was alive. And what's even more terrifying is the coroner concluded her autopsy by saying the death of Dubininya was a result of violence. The remaining 3 bodies were found in close proximity and lying together down the stream from Dubininya. The body closest to hers was Thibault's body, and his body also sustained major trauma to the skull, including numerous fractures to the temporal bone that extended around the skull, indicating a very hard impact to his head. It's even stated in the official autopsy that the cause of death was due to the fracture in his skull and caused by a great force with the subsequent falling, hurling, and concussion of Thibault, whatever the that means. Once again, the final sentence of his autopsy reads, "The death of Thibault Brignol was a result of violence." It is believed that his death was caused by a fall and not from a blunt force object, as there was no damage to his soft tissue. Furthermore, it confused investigators how he ended up where he did, because he would have been incapacitated after such a massive blow to the head. It was likely that he was dragged by other surviving members to his final resting place. That is considered the most logical reason as to why he was there. The 2 remaining bodies of Kolevatov and Zolotoyov were found a few feet downstream from Thibault Brignol. Kolevatov was laying behind Zolotoyov, holding him close in their final moments. Looking at Zolotoyov's body, he had similar injuries to Dubininya, including fractured ribs and missing eyes. He also had a massive gash on the backside of his skull, and some of his left eyebrow had been removed. The fractures sustained to his ribs were almost identical to that of Dubininya. They were on the same side, but differentiated in the direction of the actual fracture. Furthermore, it caused major internal bleeding inside his chest cavity, leading to his death, just like Dubininya. So not hypothermia. What's even crazier is he had the same blood mucus lump in his stomach as Dubininya, in spite of having his tongue still intact, which indicated massive trauma to his body. The gash on his skull and eyebrow could have been the result of a massive impact, though it is not entirely clear what caused them. What we do know is that something massive hit both Dubininya and Zolotaryov. Something hit them incredibly hard and caused them both to succumb to their injuries. The final report of Zolotaryov's death was, you guessed it, Zolotaryov has died as a result of violence. The final victim, Kolovatev, had sustained the least amount of injuries, yet it is believed that he too partially succumbed to his injuries. All of his injuries were sustained to the head and neck, and the most notable ones were a large cut behind the ear, a misshapen nose, and a deformed neck. All terrible things. Looking at the autopsy report, the coroner highlighted that the thyroid cartilage was deformed. This indicated that there was some kind of neck injury that could have affected his breathing. The injury to his nose made it have unusual mobility, which indicated that it could have been broken, further affecting his ability to breathe. There was also a good chance that the injuries occurred while he was still alive, as there was a red, slimy mass found inside of his stomach, hinting at the fact that he was swallowing blood from a broken nose. As for what caused the cut, it was never mentioned, but it was described as a large wound. Based on the injuries that Kolevatov sustained, it is believed that he was in some kind of fight with an unknown person or thing. And the autopsy states that he most likely died from exposure, but it is believed that the injuries he sustained from said fight caused him to be unable to properly move and or think straight, causing him to lie down and die from the cold. Lastly, his report ends with, the cause of death of Kolevatov was through violence. It is very apparent that something violent occurred to the final 4 victims, as each one had sustained life-threatening injuries, some worse than others, but there are still more strange things surrounding the deceased group at the Dyatlov Pass, starting off with the clothing found on the bodies of the 4 victims found near the den, here on the map. 2 of the victims, Kolevatov and Dubininya, had clothes with large amounts of radiation on them. Dubininya was wearing a brown sweater that she took from the deceased body of Krivonashenko, which was underneath the cedar tree. It tested positive for the following levels of radiation. That is crazy. Additionally, one of the pairs of pants and sweater worn by Kolevatov had 5,000 decays a minute, which is almost as much as the people at Chernobyl, which is terrifying because the cold doesn't do that. Cold doesn't do that, and generally people don't do that either. Like if you get beat by a ne'er-do-well in the woods in the middle of the wilderness, probably not going to cover you in radiation. What's even crazier is that the clothes were found to be contaminated by some sort of radioactive dust, or they came into contact with some sort of radioactive material. And we know this because the official radiation analysis report noted that after rinsing the clothes under cold water for 3 hours, which is standard protocol, the levels of radiation dropped dramatically. So what the f did they come into contact with? That's what this is the part of the whole story that is confusing to me and escapes rational thought. Continuing forward, the clothes that were not radioactive were mangled, burned, or zipped open. Now, you'd think that the last thing you're going to do if dying of hypothermia is unzip your jacket and die, but people do really crazy shit when they're dying from the elements. I mean, there's plenty of people who've been found away from their clothes, miles away, and it's generally believed that that is like a strange effect of hypothermia. You start to become delirious and you lose your mind, and yeah, you'd think it wouldn't make any sense, but it sometimes does happen. Both Kolevatov and Zolotaryov had their jackets unzipped. Furthermore, each member had torn clothing, and it is unclear whether they tore their own clothes running through the woods or if something else tore them. Maybe they were running from something or someone, or who knows. Similar to the two bodies under the cedar tree, Dubaninya and Kolevatov had burns on their clothing. Maybe they started a fire and got a little too close, but it is still unclear what exactly caused the fire damage to their clothing. Another weird thing surrounding the case is what caused them to flee from both shelters. Starting with the main tent up on the ridge. All 9 members fled from that tent, which indicates there was some kind of large threat that forced them to leave in the first place. When the tent was found, there were still loads of gear inside, and the tent was cut open, indicating that there was a real reason to flee, and it was such a real reason that they cut the tent to escape, like a baby making its way head out. Additionally, the side that was cut faced downhill, meaning that the side was cut on purpose because it would allow everyone to flee more easily into the woods. Now, it must have been an incredibly dire situation because they opted to run into the forest and face certain death rather than run back to their cache that they left at the bottom of the hill a few days before beginning their ascent to the top. The cache had a ton of necessary survival gear and would have given them a better chance to survive in the cold compared to running into the woods without the proper gear. Another interesting detail is both Thibaut Brignol and Zolotaryov had on their winter boots, implying that they were more than likely outside the tent when the incident occurred. Whatever occurred that night happened extremely fast and caused everyone involved to flee as fast as they possibly could, no matter the cost. Next, looking at the den, there were no signs of fleeing from the den like the tent, yet all of the bodies were found a few feet from it. It would have made more sense at least to try and survive inside the makeshift den. However, maybe whatever forced the crew out of the tent caught up with the survivors and forced them out of the den and then gravely injured them. I really don't know. This whole thing is such a crazy mystery. There are so many questions surrounding the Dyatlov Pass incident that remain unanswered, and this has led to numerous theories developing thanks to geniuses online. I will preface this part of the video by saying it is an extremely tragic event that remains unsolved to this day, so it's important to approach this with respect. It's been a long time. It's not one of those too soon moments, but like, these are people who died, okay? And it was horrible. It was terrible. And, you know, approaching it with compassion, empathy is one thing as well, but also it's good to figure out what happened and think about it. And it is a ridiculously bizarre situation that deserves to be talked about. The tragic death of the 9 hikers in the Ural Mountains in 1959 remains one of the most confounding mysteries of the 20th century, and the Dyatlov Pass incident has sparked many theories, each attempting to explain the event's bizarre circumstances. And the various theories that have arisen over the years range from the natural to the supernatural, like out there stuff. Out there! On top of the crazy ones, there are several theories that attempt to explain the Dyatlov Pass incident as being the result of a weather-related incident or a natural cause thing, and we'll explore them all. We'll go over the avalanche theory first because it is one of the most widely accepted explanations for the Dyatlov Pass incident, positing that the tragic deaths of the 9 hikers were caused by a small yet deadly slab avalanche. This theory suggests that while the group was camping on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, a sudden shift in the snowpack triggered an avalanche, forcing the hikers to flee in the middle of the night. An article on nature.com explores the mechanisms of avalanches and how they could have contributed to this tragedy, among other theories. There are several real variables of their setup that could have led to an avalanche disaster. You see, the hikers set up camp on a relatively steep slope, which may have been destabilized by their digging in the snow to level the ground for the tent, and this act could have inadvertently weakened the snowpack and created a prime condition for a slab avalanche. A slab avalanche occurs when a cohesive plate of snow breaks loose and slides down a slope of some kind, which can happen even with a minor trigger like a loud noise, some heavy snowfall, or a shift in the snow's general structure. That includes digging. I personally find it hard to believe that these trained people ready for a Category 3 hiking event would do something so dumb. But I don't know. Resulting slab avalanches can be small or large, and they can have devastating results. It is a mechanism of nature. It is terrifying. Diagrams of the hiker's tent location dug into the snow and pictures of the hikers digging a spot for the tent make this a compelling theory for some. Another image showing figures of the area's topography being right below a shoulder and the slope angles common with accidentally caused avalanches also indicates that this incident was within the ranges that have been recorded to occur. Though the slope angles in this occurrence were not the most common for the occurrences in general. So it's like, it could be, but also, it's not the most common. One of the most puzzling aspects of the Dyatlov Pass incident is why the hikers, many of whom were experienced and licensed, would leave their tents so abruptly and inadequately dressed. The avalanche theory explains this by suggesting that the group heard or felt the avalanche coming, prompting them to cut their way out of the tent in a desperate bid to escape. And the fear of being buried alive under tons of snow likely drove them to flee into the dark, frigid night with little regard for their own safety or the cold. The injuries sustained by the hikers have been a major point of contention in the avalanche theory because some of the hikers were found with severe internal injuries, including fractured skulls and broken ribs, yet with little external trauma. But according to the avalanche theory, these injuries could have been caused by the force of the avalanche or by being thrown against rocks, trees, things like that as they were swept away. In contrast, the absence of significant external wounds might be explained by the cushioning effect of snow. So it's like, it kills you, but it preserves you. Additionally, soft tissue damage such as missing eyes and tongues could have resulted from scavenging animals or the natural process of decomposition in the harsh environment. I would argue the natural process of decomposition unlikely in the cold snow, but it could have thawed out one day or something. It was 2 weeks between the first bite. I mean, interesting theory. Some of the victims' relatively mild injuries could be attributed to being partially buried or less directly impacted by the avalanche's force, and then they died of hypothermia, and you know, it's sad. In spite of its plausibility, the avalanche theory does have its critics. Opponents argue that the slope where the hikers camped was not steep enough for a large avalanche and that no significant avalanche debris was found at the site. Moreover, the tent was only partially covered with snow, which some suggest would not be consistent with a full-scale avalanche. Critics also point out that the footprints leading away from the tent were preserved, which would be very unlikely if a large avalanche would have swept through the area, which that also the radiation in the baton wound. Huh? The katabatic wind theory posits that the Dyatlov Pass tragedy was caused by an intense and sudden onset of katabatic winds, cold, dense air masses that descend rapidly from higher elevations under the influence of gravity and a little bit of alcohol. In the Ural Mountains where this incident occurred, these winds can reach hurricane force speeds, drastically lowering temperatures and creating severe wind chills instantly. On the night of the incident, such winds could have struck the hiker's tent with little warning, creating a life-threatening situation for everyone involved. The extreme cold and the ferocious winds might have made it impossible for the group to remain in their tent, forcing them to cut their way out and flee into the night in a desperate bid for safety. This could potentially explain why two were recovered near a cedar tree, perhaps hoping to put a barrier between themselves and the katabatic winds. And if this was the case, they could have quickly lost their sense of direction given the low light, whipped up snow, everything like that could have reduced visibility even further and separated as the hikers ventured out into the open, disoriented by the darkness and howling winds. So just it makes sense for everyone to kind of spread off, and it's sad, really. This is a terrible, sad theory. Wind. They potentially were killed by wind. Cold, evil wind. The powerful winds may have carried away vital equipment and clothing, exposing them to freezing temperatures, and in the result of this, hypothermia would have set in rapidly under these conditions, impairing their judgment and physical abilities and leading to their tragic demise. It's important to mention, as again, I did mention it once before, but hypothermia makes people do things that are illogical. Like, you're losing your mind, you're dying from the cold. It can cause mass confusion, hysteria in some people, and just bizarre, unpredictable behavior. So it's important to note that. The cold makes people do crazy shit. The katabatic winds theory explains several puzzling aspects of the Dyatlov Pass incident, including why the hikers abandoned their shelter in such haste and why their bodies were found in various states of undress and disarray. While this theory doesn't account for all the anomalies, such as the severe internal injuries and the radiation, it provides a plausible natural explanation for the hikers' behavior and the harsh conditions that contributed to their deaths. How about the infrasound theory? We're getting a little further out there, but the infrasound theory suggests that the Dyatlov Pass tragedy was caused by a rare natural phenomenon where wind passing over the mountain created a low-frequency sound wave known as infrasound. These sound waves, which are below the range of human hearing, can induce feelings of discomfort, fear, panic, and even physical symptoms like nausea. Human hearing ranges from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, and 19 hertz is considered infrasound. You ever done one of those little tests where it's like, how low can you hear? How high can you hear? And it's like, oh, you have 20-year-old ears if you can hear. Yeah, I failed that shit when I was a child, dude. I fucking used to shoot guns with no ear protection when I was a little baby. 19 hertz, infrasound. It is called the fear frequency because it can bring upon feelings of, you guessed it, fear and unease and discomfort. You can hear infrasound tones when it's played loud enough. The peaks of its sound waves enter the audible range a bit. It's a very bizarre thing.
Well, here's the secret. You actually can hear them if you turn them up loud enough. Let me explain. So we got our normal sound wave right here, but if we turn it up louder, you see that the waves actually get higher. That's known as volume, or simply loudness. So basically, if we turn up the volume, we can finally hear this mysterious infrasound.
I don't know anything about sound or infra waves or shits. I don't know. The hikers may have been subjected to the sound waves in this scenario, triggering intense irrational fear. This could explain why they suddenly cut their way out of the tent and fled into the freezing wilderness without proper clothing or gear, and then died. The disorientation and panic caused by the infrasound might have led them to behave in ways that ultimately led to their own deaths. While the infrasound theory doesn't explain all the injuries the hikers sustained, it does offer a compelling explanation for their seemingly irrational behavior. The theory is also supported by infrasound being a documented phenomenon in similar mountainous regions. In these regions, specific wind conditions can generate these powerful, bizarre sounds. However, due to the rarity and unpredictable nature of infrasound, the theory remains difficult to prove definitively. Also, radiation. Did they just, they were transported, there was a military helicopter, did they rub something? It's unlikely. Also, why did they test for radiation after? Anyways, guys, I don't know. 19 hertz might be called the fear frequency by some, even the YouTube channel The Y-Files, one of my favorite YouTube channels that has ever existed of all time. If you couldn't tell, they have a video dedicated to this frequency if you'd like to check it out. Below 19 hertz is a tone called the ghost frequency, where you can supposedly start to see things like ghosts or shadows.
18 hertz is approximately the resonant frequency of the human eye. If this low frequency wave hits the eyeball's resonant frequency, it can cause the eye to vibrate, creating a smearing of vision. With this in mind, the smearing could easily create things that look like shadowy figures.
It reminds me of that red theory where Vietnam soldiers had red NVGs and they saw demons and they shot at stuff that didn't exist. Crazy. Anyways, I bring up supernatural due to how the following claims will appear. They're outlandish, they're bizarre, and bizarre and outlandish goes hand in hand with the Dyatlov Pass incident, to be honest. There are many theories that what happened to the hikers is truly something strange. Demons, angels, Yeti, the military, KGB, it gets wild. And this, of course, would not be an Oompaville Classic video if I didn't talk about theories that are insane, things that involve the government or creatures of the unknown, etc., etc., etc. So first, we must set the scene. You're in a snowy landscape at night, sleeping in your tent, it's pitch black out, and the only noise is the wind and the crunching of the snow. However, as the night continues to go on, you keep seeing these light flashes. Not just like across the sky, but walking past your campsite. Not only are you confused, but you're terrified. This is the theory of manifested objects and psychic photography by the campers. Now, I know that makes no sense at all, and I won't be able to make it make sense to anyone because I'm terrible at explaining things. But let me explain! Apparently, these orb-like webs and bright luminous objects are fallen angels in orb form, and they're manifesting into our dimension. Apparently, Semyon Zolotaryov, one of the hikers during a blizzard, stepped from his tent out to take a picture of these strange objects, possibly believing they were even UFOs. He described some of the images as woven meshes, resembling almost like a blanket creature that is insanely bright. Conspiracy theorists state that these bright objects he's looking at are typical fallen angel, higher demon things manifesting in orb form. Conspiracy theorists have looked at some of these images and come to the conclusion that they are similar to what NASA had photographed in the 1960s, which they called the Ibani jellyfish UFO. And I'll tell you what, man, this stuff really starts to get real wild. These are photos from the guy who died. Some of the conspiracy theorists believe that it's not a UFO, but some kind of manifestation of a dimensional being, an angel, a demon, ectoplasmoid, etc., etc. I don't really know, dude. The last of the Zolotaryov film segment ended with this picture, which conspiracy theorists believe was a higher level demon manifesting into the form of a mushroom shape with a creepy face attempting to physically manifest. I have no idea what the going on here. Maybe I'm too dumb to understand this shit. The manifesting of demons and angels and stuff. I don't know. They're in the wilderness in Russia. I don't know. Shit, bud. It does seem weird. And also, why would they take these pictures if they didn't see anything? So there must be a point, or maybe insanity slipped in and they were truly losing it. I don't know. These pictures were taken. They're real. And people have really dug deeply into this whole thing. Very deeply. Deep. Ugh. It does get weirder, by the way. There is a bright light included in one photo, possibly showing 3 other members of the party looking up at it as well. It is so insanely bright that it takes up more than half the photo, and what possibly could this mysterious bright light actually be? I have no clue. It could literally be a plane or a helicopter with a light, or some strange alien phenomenon, or a demon, or maybe cameras sucked in Russia in the 1950s. So that's possible as well. All this boils down to a belief that a lot of people have that it's not just UFOs and extraterrestrials, that's normal stuff. It's angels or demons from a higher plane that came and investigated the group and then killed them. This article from Conspiracy Theorist states so many different forms these things can take. It's almost giving me a headache and making my brain explode, and I'm 99% sure this screenshot is from Oblivion once again. It is absolutely. Is definitely, that is from Oblivion. They stole that from Oblivion. There are tons and tons of these weird orbs and meshes in the photographs that were taken by the hikers in the Dyatlov Pass incident, and a lot of them are unexplainable, but there are a few that really truly catch my eye. In one photo, one of these orb creatures seems to manifest itself into something I would be more inclined to believe than an otherworldly blanket, and that is a monster. This looks like an ape thing, a demon, skinwalker, I don't know what the There's also belief that it was not in fact ghosts or spirits that were supernatural that killed these people, but some sort of beast-like creature. The Yeti, okay? It's the Yeti. The abdominal snowman? What is it? Abominable snowman? Yeti? I'm not sure. With the autopsy reports showing that the bodies were crushed to death and the campsite was completely ransacked and torn apart, what type of monster would be strong enough to cause that much damage? A Yeti, obviously. Okay, guys, that's what some people believe is it was a beast out in the woods. Especially this had to be something that could survive the harsh climate. Don't tell me it was a bear, as one unnamed renowned doctor supposedly stated that it was a result of the squeezing of their chests by some big creature. So unless the bear just wanted to squeeze them, it definitely wasn't a bear, or maybe it was, I'm not sure. I don't know. What do you guys think? Maybe it was aliens or the military. I don't know, dude. It's really... The radiation thing is still so disturbing. There's really nothing known about it. It's unfortunate. Some people believe it was the military. Potentially there was a sighting of this thing in the sky near Dyatlov Pass, and a bunch of people saw it. There were bright lights in the sky. UFOs could have been it, but the state of the bodies doesn't really make sense if it was a rocket or some kind of military technology. And also, why would they be killed? Why would you crush a guy if he's involved in some kind of military thing he shouldn't be involved in, and not just shoot him and then bury him so that no one could ever see? Like, it doesn't The military conspiracies don't really make a lot of sense at all. That's saying a lot because there is we just talked about angels and demons. They make more sense than this. According to Lev Ivanov, who was in charge of the investigation at the Dyatlov Pass in a 1990s interview, he made a statement saying that he noticed the tops of the pine trees in the forest were singed or burned at the top. However, he struck this from the record to not sound like an insane conspiracy theorist. He had also stated that the true cause of the incident to be fireballs or a UFO. That's pretty crazy. And Ivanov was also a respected forensic investigator, but he did completely change his narrative multiple times, which in my opinion ruins his credibility entirely and leaves more questions than answers. So thanks, Ivanov. I also like how as soon as the Soviet Union collapses, he's like, let me interview. His letter stated that the hikers were amateurs when that was obviously not true. And on the flip side, he says that it's possible that it could have been a UFO. So it's like, he thought the hikers were amateurs, but also he's like, could have been a UFO. There were eyewitness accounts of fire-like orbs flying across the sky during the time. That's what that guy said. The government could have had its involvement as well. Either it is responsible for the UFO object or the covering up of the situation. I really don't know. But according to some very conflicting data, it's supposed that 2 KGB officers were a part of the Dyatlov group carrying out a mission, and this whole thing was a KGB experiment. Now, KGB involvement could be responsible for only 4 of the 10 films remaining in the cameras, and the rest being confiscated by the government. Why else would they have so much equipment, so many cameras? And like, I feel like, how do you even get a camera in the 1950s? How do you get anything? Especially in Russia. We had Sears. You could buy a small house in America in the 1950s from Sears catalog. But how do you get stuff? Did they have stores? I'm just kidding. I'm just teasing. Settle down, commies. This, out of all the outlandish explanations, seems to be one of the more likely outcomes to me, in spite of conflicting reports and just a lot of it not making sense. Government involvement in a test or watching UFO military weapons tests and reporting their findings later on. I don't know, dude. It kind of makes sense. But still, the radiation stuff, maybe they were military bound-esque. They sat in a transport helicopter, rubbed against stuff. There's so little information, it's very frustrating. But also, there's another theory, and that is natives of the ice. Another conspiracy theory is that the hikers stepped onto territory that was not their own. And that was the territory of the Mansi natives. The Mansi people are indigenous people living in Russia, and there is a theory that the expedition accidentally set up camp on their territory and paid the price, or even a belief that the natives knew something about this place that wasn't safe, alluding heavily to Yetis and demons and shit. The mountain area the hikers were headed to was called the Kholat Syakhi, which I'm not saying correctly, or the transliteration of the Mansi language, Dead Mountain or Silent Peak. This was because of the lack of game for hunting by Mansi hunters, literally calling it silent because there was no beasts to hunt. There's nothing there, nothing at all there. However, because of this, it was still their turf, and when investigators arrived on scene, they noticed a structure they believed to be a chum or tent. It's a temporary settling or marking used by the native people. Supposedly, a chum is a place of sacrifice, not human sacrifice, but like a blood sacrifice, usually of animals, and the people believed that this would protect them from disease and danger and provide them with more food. But because it's sacred ground and the trespassers may have stepped onto their seemingly holy land, it could be inferred that the natives took offense to this group and therefore murdered them. Some people think this. I don't believe this shit. But there is some corroboration. There's an older story. Once again, it's just a story. There's no proof of this either. A guy stole a kill at the sacrificial grounds, and when he returned to steal another, he was never found again. But in that story, the man stole food. It's unclear if that's what the hikers did, but if it were true, that could potentially make sense as to why the Mansi people could have been angry. But I don't buy that it's always the fault of the indigenous people. Tell you what though, I ain't going camping in no damn mountains. Shit, what the fuck? Anyways, guys, thank you all for watching. Thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video, and go to sour.gg, join the Gump Club to see uncensored stuff and longer versions of videos. If you want to, of course, you also get cool perks with Sour Boys. You get some free shipping on stuff, which we already offer that with certain orders over certain amounts, but the amount is lower if you could join the Gump Club, and also the first month is always free, so you can literally steal money from me, basically. Because we cannot ship the candy for free and make money, because we do all of it ourselves. All of it. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. See you in the next one.